Nityanandam, everyone. Welcome back to Autobiography of the Avatar. We're going to get right into the slides today. And the link is there, and the slides are actually here along with the posting. You can follow them there or just on the screen. So I'm just starting with who is Swamiji? The many dimensions of His Divine Holiness, Nityananda Paramashivam. The next slide, great rishis, munis, siddhas, superconscious mutants, who know the science of incarnation, as per Hinduism, predicted and recognized His Divine Holiness Nityananda Paramashivam as an incarnation of Paramashiva and Parashakti. So here we see illustration of Paramashiva with his 25 heads. So, and sitting on the Simhasan with Parashakti. And then Swamiji, the living incarnation of Paramashiva, is there. In Vedic tradition, we understand that the superconsciousness pervades everything. So what is the source of things? What is the thing that exists beyond the physical world? And where does our conscious intelligence come from? And so one representation of the superconsciousness is Paramashiva. So there's Paramashiva with 25 heads sitting with Parashakti. So Paramashiva is the source of superconsciousness. So Paramashiva has a masculine component and a feminine component, Parashakti. So they're depicted here together because they're both necessary aspects of the creation, that Paramashiva is radiating as a source, and Parashakti is like the expansion to become many. So Paramashiva is radiating as the space of oneness, and when he decides to expand, to really manifest the entire existence, that manifestation happens with the creation happening of Parashakti. So rather than limiting, and actually this is something very common in Hinduism, that the superconsciousness is often represented as both masculine and feminine. So we even see this as representations of Ardhiranishwara, who is basically a melding of the masculine and feminine consciousness as the space of oneness. And so this is very clearly represented with Paramashiva and Parashakti sitting together as history of the revelation of the superconsciousness, which is the sharing of the science of enlightenment from Paramashiva to Parashakti. But symbolizing also that there's no separation, it's just a different manifestation of the oneness of superconsciousness. So that's also important to know, that Hindus do not discriminate on the basis of gender ever. And so one of the benefits of having the oneness superconsciousness represented by both the masculine and the feminine components as this deity of Paramashiva and Parashakti is to reinforce and be clear that there is not a discrimination against any genders. Hindus recognize traditionally 11 genders as a continuity rather than discrete and exclusive categories. So the representation of the masculine and feminine as one deity is very clearly telling that there is nothing superior and inferior. It's a different manifestation of the superconsciousness. So this is one of the unique components about Hindus and Hinduism, is that Hindus can accept any and all gods. And the fact and experience that one's chosen deity can be the ultimate expression of superconsciousness does not inhibit or limit the fact, the reality that another person's chosen deity can also be the ultimate manifestation, expression of the divine superconsciousness. So my chosen God or deity being the ultimate expression of oneness and having the ability to lead me to the ultimate experience and realization of enlightenment does not mean that you also cannot have a deity, a different God that is also the ultimate manifestation of divine superconsciousness that can also lead you, or even me or others, to the ultimate experience and manifestation of enlightenment. So my chosen deity doesn't have anything to do with limiting your chosen deity. So if the existence exists in the space of oneness and is manifesting everything, then it's beyond limitation. So every expression of that is an expression of the source. So my chosen expression of this deity as ultimate has in no way any limiting on your deity also being manifestation of the ultimate. And there's no conflict there. So this is a unique contribution of the Vedic tradition, that we're able to accept any and all gods without conflict. So instead of it being something like kill or be killed, kind of survival of the fittest, me or you kind of thing, or I must convert you or kill you as my only options to deal with differences, it's not about that. It's about we can not only coexist, but we can mutually enrich each other towards the ultimate goal. So it's a completely different way of looking at life. It's not about controlling or limiting that you have to believe this, you have to see that, you have to agree to this, even if you don't, and otherwise you're excluded. That just doesn't exist. There's just way too many transmutations and manifestations of divine consciousness as each one of us is. We've all been manifested from some existence. So that existence, by its nature, cannot be separate from the rest of existence, as none of us can be. We've all been manifested out of existence. If we're seeing things as dual, then we just have to zoom back a little bit and see it in the space of oneness. So all these things manifested in the space of oneness means that we're all extensions of each other. And so for me to be violent towards you means violent towards myself. And so the more expansive and inclusive way for us to operate is with the knowledge that we may have different starting points and different paths, but the ultimate realization is in the space of oneness. And what we should be doing is working to enrich each other and everyone towards our own mutual realization of that oneness. And me doing that on my path in no way excludes or limits you from you doing that on your path. Even though they may be different paths, there's no conflict. So as we see in just our second slide, in the space of oneness as a single deity, and also the 25 heads of Paramashiva, which is another super important part of Hinduism. So we often hear about creation, sustenance, and destruction. So we have the creating, the maintenance, and the destruction. And those three things are happening. So that is kind of a given that those things will happen. We don't have to give our yes, those things are happening. But what those three functionality as kind of stopping at that, what that limits is that what we have as our experience as human beings is that we are in delusion about what life really is. So somehow we as even as superconscious or divine beings have taken the human form and come to express through the human body. But when we get here, it's like we kind of forget our previous nature of being a divine superconsciousness, of existing beyond the pains and sorrows and difficulties and arguments of human life, and we get caught up in all those things and start to create this kind of painful sorrow. And it's like we got caught in this delusion. So the delusion is actually a really important part of life, because to various degrees at various times we're stuck in that, and but we can be liberated from it. So that process, really, the creation and the sustenance and the destruction is there, but what's really more pertinent and important to humans is the extent to which we're caught in delusion or suffering. The creation, sustenance, and destruction will happen, but in between those times, we are distracted by various degrees of delusion. So just to only limit our understanding to creation, sustenance, and destruction is really quite limiting, because that doesn't even really start to describe the condition that most humans beings live in for their entire life, which is to a certain extent or another delusion. So, but we may see that different people to different extents come out of that delusion. So that really process is more pertinent and relevant to human life than just the creation, sustenance, and destruction, although obviously it's very important. But the process of the 100 years of life is really more about, in a certain sense, the extent to which we experience delusion and come out of that. So instead of just creation, sustenance, and destruction, Shiva or Paramashiva, the source of life, not only is making these happenings of creation, sustenance, and destruction, but he's also doing the pulling out of delusion. And fifth, liberation. So to think about, so this is one reason why we can't equate the word God or the concept of God from other traditions into Hinduism, because even just as per kind of the major focus of literature is mostly entirely limited to the generation, operation, and destruction, the creation, the sustenance, and the destruction. And there's to the same extent, there's no mention of that there's a delusion aspect created that we are all mired in, and becoming free of that is possible and necessary. So just the idea that you cannot become God, that you're not God, that you're separate from God or the divine consciousness, and that there's no kind of representation of that existing now, that is not how Hindus live. It's not. We don't at all feel that somehow you're a sinner, or that somehow you're not an expression of the ultimate part of life, or that you're somehow limited, or that you're kind of eternally tainted, and that the divine cannot be experienced here, and the divine is not represented in everything. The way that the understanding from the Hindu perspective is that the superconsciousness pervades everything. So the superconsciousness is the source of, all of us have a consciousness. So that has to come from a source. So that source, the superconsciousness, is the thing that pervades everything. This is as per even the Isavasya Upanishad, the first of the 108 Upanishads. The first line is Isavasyam idagam sarvam, which is essentially saying that the superconsciousness pervades everything. So the very first kind of teaching through Upanishads, one of the Vedic set of scriptures, is the immediate revelation that the superconsciousness is the thing that exists, is the thing that pervades everything. So it's so the Hindu perspective is that we are expressions and manifestations of the ultimate divine superconsciousness. You are already that thing, tattvamasi. That you are already that superconsciousness. And so the teaching is just that we just have to realize that. The creation is there, the sustenance of the life is going on, the destruction of the life is going on, and the delusion is there. So we just have to come out of the delusion that we're not that we're somehow different from the existence, and become liberated. So really what's most important in the life is the context and the operation of the delusion, and how to come out of it to get liberated back to your source. So the whole context, the first introduction to you about you for Hindus is that Brahmanyam Bahuputradam, that you are the favorite inheritor of the cosmos. So you are literally a child, an expression, an extension of the divine superconsciousness that is the source of all things, that pervades all things. You are the favorite expression, manifestation of that superconsciousness. That superconsciousness has no incompletions and no problems, no difficulties in anything that happens as an expression of itself in all the ways that it chooses to expand. It's expanding simply to manifest itself in as many different ways as possible, simply to continue the blissful manifestation that is it, and to enjoy itself in all ways. The intention is not that you're a slave or a servant or a sinner, or that God is vengeful or greedy or jealous. That's not at all the Hindu perspective. So we don't teach that to kids. We don't have that understanding at all. You are already the ultimate. You are already a manifestation of the ultimate. You are already complete. You are already connected to anything that you need to be connected to. Everything that is required for your existence or for any manifestation or realization of the existence is available to you now. And sohamasmi, that even when I pray to the divine, I am already him. Even when I pray to the divine, although I do pray, I can still pray or meditate. I can still set my intention and my consciousness and my will. Even when I adjust and set my consciousness towards the ultimate divine consciousness, I am already that. Sohamasmi. Even when I pray, I know I am already him. So it's just it's the divine superconsciousness worshiping the divine superconsciousness, praying to the divine superconsciousness when I worship and pray. Everything is a manifestation of the divine superconsciousness. This is why Hindus can worship anything, and have also contributed the unique science of prana pratishta, which is a science of taking the divine superconsciousness that is the thing that pervades everything and is the source, the intelligent, the independent, intelligent source of everything. The science of taking that superconsciousness and putting it into a material object such as Atmalinga, which we have here, so that the humans that have physical bodies can come to the physical object and receive the superconscious blessing into their physical body from this physical object. This is the science of prana pratishta, or summoning the divine superconsciousness to live in a physical object. So Hindu temples are actually not just worship centers. They're not just meeting places. They're not just social meeting groups, not just a place to pray. First and foremost, the Hindu temple is Devalaya, the abode of the divine. So every Hindu temple cannot be built on top of any other structure, and it cannot be moved. It's an energy center. So the purpose, one of the major purposes of the Hindu temple is that it is an enlightenment ecosystem. It's literally an energy space that has been created, and that space has been requested for a divine being to reside in that space and radiate their independent intelligence, as we each have an independent conscious intelligence. There is also the possibility for us to use our intelligence and our will to connect our consciousness to an expansive consciousness, our perceived smaller consciousness, to the super consciousness that pervades everything. So these the independent intelligence that is each of us, and that comes from a source that exists before our human body. That source of superconsciousness exists before we take our human body, and it exists after our human body dissolves, and it exists even if we don't take a human body, and it's ready to fill the next human body that comes into existence. So that independent intelligence is existing, independent of whether or not we have a physical body. So there are independent intelligences such as our self and our own self that exists beyond the human body, and that in that case exist without the human body. But because the consciousness, the awareness, the life energy force is the source of all things and pervades all things, we have access to that through our consciousness, the part of us that is directly a manifestation of the source, not diluted by emotions, thoughts, feelings, physical pains and sufferings. The point of consciousness that is us, that is inside of us, that can never be contaminated, that no matter how many traumas we went through, we can still experience pure love, is the proof that our consciousness can never be diminished. So that is the point that exists in many different forms and exists without human body, and that we refer to as deity. So that conscious expansion that is kind of more pure, can be more pure than the manifestation of our current human life, where we are experiencing delusion. We can connect our individual consciousness to the collective consciousness, even through deities or through the enlightened beings that don't currently have human bodies the same as us. So those beings, we can request them through a scientific process to inhabit and exist in a physical form and a physical place. And that place becomes Chaitra, or a pilgrimage center, or an enlightenment ecosystem, an energetic space that cleanses your body, mind, consciousness on a level that we cannot do on our own. So temples, when they're consecrated and maintained properly, can actually do something for us that only gurus can do, by giving us initiation and cleansing on deeper levels of our being. So this is one of the unique contributions of Vedic tradition, is the science of prana pratishtha, the ability to summon the divine superconsciousness to live within a physical space. And that's what a Hindu temple is. First and foremost, it's the home of a deity, and the deity owns the place, and the deity reveals through enlightened scriptures and enlightened masters how they need to be treated, and how the devotees will get maximum benefit from that energy center. So it's not about us deciding what we like or don't like. that superconscious being that we request to live in that space reveals to us through the scriptures and through enlightened beings how to get the most out of that energy center. So in examples like Sabrimala Temple, it's not for us to go against what the deity is describing for us to how to interact with him and how to maintain this space and how to perform worship. If we don't want to worship that deity in that way, then you don't have to. But we don't have the right to say that these people should not be allowed to worship in the way that they want to, for many, many various reasons that I won't go into right now. There's many other Ayyappan temples, and there's many other temples of examples of where certain people, even sannyasis, are not to go into certain temples. We don't bring a big uproar that's saying, Hindus discriminate against sannyasis, right? Or if there are temples where only women can be the head priest, only women should perform puja. We're not in a big uproar saying that Hindus are discriminating against men. So these are kind of anti-Hindu attacks that happen. So these are some of the unique contributions from Vedic tradition. And so just to go back to the 25 heads of Paramashiva, Paramashiva performs the 5 functions of generation, operation, destruction, pulling out of delusion, and liberation, or merging back into the source. So these 5 components are very important. And this is why the term God doesn't really translate that well, although we use it for kind of communication purposes. It doesn't really translate that well to Hindu deities for various reasons. And part of it is just that it kind of misses the point of that we're spending most of our life in delusion, and what is needed is liberation. That's really the part that humans need to know about. So to exclude that from a discussion is really kind of missing the entire point of the possibilities of life. And so the 25 heads are also representative these 5 operations that Paramashiva performs, and each one of those operations also has not just these 5 phases, but within that, the 5 phases of the generation of that phase itself, and the sustenance of that phase, the destruction of that phase, the pulling out of delusion of that phase, and the liberation of that phase. So each 5 of the phases or happenings of Paramashiva also has 5 faces. So it's represented in this sense as 25 heads of Paramashiva. So we're just going to cap it at that for today. I've had a really great time. I hope it's been a little bit interesting for some of you. I know it's been a little bit, I've been jumping around a little bit. It's such a vast, amazing tradition. There's so much to share. But I just want to say thank you to Swamiji for the opportunity to be here and for all of his initiations and his continuous nonstop work to give everything possible and more to the entire humanity. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and we'll see you again next time. Let's close with the Purna Mantra. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat Sarvam Bhagavat Shri Nityananda Paramashiva Parukarpanamastu. Om Nityanandam